The Mandalorian and Grogu feels less like the grand return of Star Wars to theaters and more like a really expensive season premiere. And as always, I have a few thoughts on this one. Before even talking about the movie itself, I think it's important to explain where I am as a Star Wars fan. I absolutely love the original trilogy. I like parts of the sequel trilogy, and I watched all of The Mandalorian because I felt like I had to keep up with the larger story. But somewhere along the way, Star Wars started to feel like the Avengers era Marvel to me. Too many shows, too many characters, too much lore, too much homework. I watched Ahsoka, I watched season 1 of Andor, I watched all of The Mandalorian, but eventually I just kind of checked out. So I was actually excited for this movie because it felt separate enough to stand on its own, and with Dave Filoni heavily involved, it felt like it had the potential to recapture some of the sincerity and fun that I missed from older Star Wars. And it is fun, but it's also kind of forgettable. The movie opens incredibly strong with this long tactical combat sequence that immediately establishes how dangerous and effective Mando is. It reminded me a little bit of the Darth Vader hallway scene in Rogue One, a Star Wars story, not because it's as intense, but because of how methodically it builds tension and introduces the character. If you've never seen the show before, it's a great introduction. Not just to him, but also the cuteness of Grogu. I also appreciated that the movie had opening credits. That sounds like a weird thing to compliment, but modern franchise movies are so allergic to actual cinematic openings now that it genuinely stood out. Visually, the movie is gorgeous. ILM absolutely shows off here, especially with the volume environments. There's a city scene with reflective rain puddles that looked insane in Dolby, and there are moments where the visual effects genuinely feel seamless. There are shots where entire environments are reflected naturally in Mando's armor that would have been absurdly expensive with traditional CGI workflows. The score by Ludwig Göransson is also excellent. A lot of the strongest musical themes are pulled from the show, and they feel so much bigger and cinematic here. And I love how different planets almost had different genres of music attached to them. It made the movie feel more varied than I expected. And of course, Grogu still works. He's basically the Wall-E of Star Wars. He barely says anything, but he's endlessly curious, expressive, funny, and impossible not to love. There's a whole stretch where Mando is injured and Grogu has to step up on his own, and those scenes are some of the strongest in the movie. There's also a line late in the film, the old protect the young, and then the young protect the old. This is the way. And that's the movie at its core. The relationship works because they protect each other. But the movie's biggest issue is that it never really feels like a movie. It feels like television. Even before seeing it, there were rumors that this started as another season of the show, and while I don't know if that's true, it certainly feels that way. There's no real central villain, no strong narrative drive, and not much thematic momentum pushing the story forward. It's basically, they get into trouble, they escape, then they get into trouble again, they escape, and eventually there's a big battle, and then an even bigger battle. Scene to scene, it's entertaining, but as a complete story, it feels weirdly aimless, and that problem only gets worse because the movie assumes a lot of audience knowledge. After the movie, I learned that several of the characters and relationships that I was confused by were apparently established in animated shows and movies like Star Wars: The Clone Wars, but the movie barely explains any of that on screen. There's a pilot character early on who clearly has history with Mando and Grogu, and the movie treats his arrival like you're already supposed to know him and love him. I didn't. At a certain point, it starts feeling almost insulting that the movie assumes audiences have consumed every animated series, every Disney Plus show, and every side story before even buying a ticket. Pedro Pascal is also kind of hard to evaluate here because Mando spends almost the entirety of the movie behind the helmet. And I don't even know how often it is Pedro under there versus a stunt performer with Pedro doing the voiceover. He does get one really strong unmasked sequence about an hour and a half into the movie, but it's only 5 minutes, and otherwise the mask limits a lot of the emotional expression, and that hurts the movie that already struggles to create deeper emotional stakes. The supporting cast is similarly underused. Sigourney Weaver is all over the marketing, but she's really only in a handful of scenes. Jeremy Allen White is fine as the son of Jabba the Hutt, but like most of the supporting characters, he's introduced like he's going to be this incredibly important character and then mostly just exists to move the plot between action scenes and be a damsel in distress. That said, I really did enjoy the climax. I like how it's split into multiple battles happening all at once, all with very different tones. One is a brutal combat involving the Hutts, one's a more tactical Mandalorian action, and then Grogu gets his own Force-sensitive sequence. There's also fun little touches for longtime fans, like seeing the BDX droids from Disney parks parks appear on screen, which was kind of surreal because I was in the parks when they first premiered at Disneyland. I also have to mention how funny it was seeing Martin Scorsese show up in a Star Wars movie after all of his public comments about franchise filmmaking. I had no idea he was in this, but his voice was unmistakable and it made for a funny cameo, although I'm sure it wasn't funny in the way the creators intended. And at the end of the day, I don't think this movie justified why the story needed to be theatrical. It looked bigger than television at times, but narratively, it still felt episodic. It's not really as messy as Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, but it lacks the emotional weight and purpose of something like Rogue One. It's entertaining, visually impressive, occasionally charming, but I don't think it's going to reignite passion for Star Wars in people who have drifted away from the franchise like me. Overall, The Mandalorian and Grogu is a fun extension of the show with great visuals, strong action, and an endlessly lovable Grogu, but it never really finds a compelling story worthy of the big screen. My Letterboxd review for Star Wars: The Mandalorian and Grogu is 3 out of 5 stars. Thank you so much for watching this one. If you like this review, let me know down in the comments down below, or consider giving this video a like or even subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much for watching this one, and I'll see you guys in the next one.